Yeah. Right. Okay. The learning sponsors, the Year of Learning, Friends of Malaskotsky, Moshe Zelig Ben Mordechai. Martin Lippman and family in memory of his wife, Malka Chana Bat Pinchas. Friends of Herb Jeremiah, Svi Ben Zeb. Friends of Sam Coleman, Shmuel Ben Yaakov. Friends of Gideon Lazinski, Mordechai Shlomo Ben Meir. Bella and David Adler in memory of her father, Yahu Ben Yosef Kohen. Those who were inspired by our Rebbetzin Emerita, Sheila Shapiro, Sarah Esther Malka Bat Meshulam Yisachar. Gail and Leslie Kaplan, in memory of their parents, Mushka Shprinzabat, Yosef Chaim Bechava, Hanan ben Moshe Eliezer Vachana, Pesha bat Shmuel Yitzchak Halevi Vitzipora, Yisra ben Yoel Moshe Cohen Vachana, Rexford Friends of Gladys Sherman, Gutta ben Meir, Michael Klein and Friends of Judah Klein, Yehuda B'Svi ben Chaim, Marsha Bronner in memory of her husband, Harav Yerachmiel ben Shmuel, a month of learning by Reuven and Susan Podolsky in memory of her father, of his father, Tzvi ben Pinchas. Charlie Gelfenstein in memory of his mother, Dacia Gilbert Meir Levi, as well as in memory of his father, Meir ben Yaakov. A week of learning by Susan Fuchta Kramer in memory of her late husband, Harav Shmuel Aaron ben Ephraim Fischel. Marsha Federbush in memory of her father, Menachem Mendel ben Shlomo. Shamas have an aliyah, crank Rafia, Velta Yeshua, Shamas Leah.
Amen.
I'll get you the page.
All right. So yesterday there was a
I'm sorry, I apologize. Which page will we start?
I mean, we are at the very top of Yud Beis Amud Aleph. The very top, first word, first line.
Oh, you finished the daf yesterday?
Yes. So yesterday when Ula was speaking, remember we had a list of statements of Ula, the name of Rabbi Elazar, and he said that you can collect debts from avodim. So it's a little bit of a problem. It sounds like he was saying in one respect that avodim can receive a lien the same way as land. When Rav Nachman challenged him and said, did Rabbi Elazar say it even to collect a debt from a slave that's owned by an orphan, which would mean that a slave is truly like land? He said, no, that he didn't say. However, today we find something shocking. After Rav Nachman left, look at now at the top of the page, after Rav Nachman walked out, Ula said to the assembled, the truth is, Rav Elazar really said what? You can even collect a debt, a lien from a piece of land that was inherited by orphans. In other words, what the slaves really are land. He said the opposite. Rav Nachman said, Rav Nachman afterwards, when he hears about it, he says, what? Ishtamtid. He slipped, Ishtamtid Ulai. He hid himself from me. But he didn't want to be there. He was afraid to answer me the truth. That what? That really he held that an evidence like a piece of land because he didn't want me to fight him. Now, so the question is, do slaves have the din of land? I want you to know the pasuk clearly says, it says that we have to possess slaves as an inheritance. And it really compares slaves to land in this respect. Just like land is acquired with kesef, shtar, and chazaka, we acquire a piece of land either with money or with a contract, or by fixing the borders, by doing something to fix the borders. So too, that is a slave acquired in those ways. The question is, though, does that comparison of the Torah make an eved completely comparable to land, or no? Only as regards acquisition, but in other ways, an eved is clearly not like a piece of land. Now, just to get at, because this is going to come up several times today, what's the most blatant difference between an eved and land? Even if you consider an eved in a certain respect to be a very solid type of property, the obvious point there is what? That an eved has a mind of its own. An eved moves. It doesn't stay in one place, and it has its own will, which is very important. Because don't think that movement alone is the point. Because animals also move. They're not the same as slaves. It's not the same thing. But an eved is a human being. Now, so there was a case in Nardah, the Agbu dining in Nardah, and what happened was the judges in Nardah collected a debt of the father from the slaves that were inherited by the orphans. Having Uvda b'Pumbedisa, there was also a case in Pumbedisa by Rav Chana bar Bizna. And Rav Chana bar Bizna collected a debt that was owed by the father from the slave that was inherited by the orphans. Amar Rav Nachman, and Rav Nachman said to them, he said, you are wrong. Zila Adura, go back and give the money back. below if you don't give the money back, I'm going to take your house away. Now it's strange that he went after the judges. He should have gone. Who should have gone after? He should have gone and called back the money from whom? From the creditor who collected it. Why did he go to the judges? The simple answer is because the truth is that when the Beis Din paskin that the creditor was allowed to collect, they're allowed to collect, and nobody has a right to take anything away. I don't care what you hold, you can't take it back as the Beis Din paskin. So until he forces the judges, he can't go to the creditor and say, give that money back to your friends. He has to go to the judges to get them to renege. Amalei Rav Nachman. So Rabbi said, Rav Nachman, what are you doing? You're so adamant that a slave is not like land. Or Ula, we see Ula held that way. Or Rabbi Lazar, Ula held that way in the name of Rabbi Lazar. Or Daini in Ardor, you see the judges in Ardor held that an Ebed was like slave was like land. Or Rav Chana Bar Bizna, also Rav Chana Bar Bizna. He says, well, half the world here believes this. He says to him, he says, Kaman Svir, he says, Mar Kaman Svir, he says, he says, who are you following? You're against the whole world. Everybody has a tradition, not like you, that we see that the comparison of the Torah, Bisnachaltem, that says that you should take possession of slaves as an inheritance for your children, not how people translate. I know people want to translate Bisnachaltem, you shall give them as an inheritance, but that would say V'hinchaltem would be give them as an inheritance. Bisnachaltem means possess them as an inheritance to pass them on to your children. You see that everybody learns the pasuk not only in terms of acquisition of kinyan, but in all respects, they really how the tradition was that a slave is like land. So Amarle said, "Nice." He says, "Ana masnisi adan." He says, "Sorry, I have a brisa, and I know clearly from our tradition, from our teachers, that a slave is not like land." Now, first of all, there's a rule. The Torah told us that when the seventh year comes, so the seventh year cancels all of the debts that are owed. If you don't collect your debt, let's say simply the way we follow generally, if you don't collect your debt before the end of the seventh year of the Shemitah year, your debt is canceled. No, what is the average person going to say? Well, as the seventh year comes close, I'm not going to be lending any money. But Hashem said, don't do that. Hashem said, I don't want you to do that. I don't want you to hold back. You have to give loans anyway because people need to get loans. You have to trust me. He said, don't hold back. But what happened was that unfortunately that's a hard test. That's a very hard test. And the Jewish people were not doing well. They were holding back. They couldn't. It's a hard test. It's hard. I've had a lot of cases, and it's funny because the man in the street is very stringent. When you speak to real Talmidei Chachamim, they understand that the test is a hard thing. I've had many cases where Jewish people were married to non-Jewish people and then discovered that they should be fulfilling the Torah. It's a very big test. A person that loves somebody and married them, even then discover the Torah is true. It's not so easy as then to just get up and divorce somebody that you loved or somebody had children with. And I was one time talking to somebody, I'm not going to tell you who, but Mamish, one of our Gedolim, and he's passed away already now. And I was discussing one such case with him. And he said to me, I don't know what I would do. I don't know what I'd do in that case. I was shocked. I wasn't shocked really, but he said, I don't know what I would do. It's a very hard test, and so it was, the people were failing. And this is such a beautiful thing. Hillel came out and he did something interesting. He said, okay, look, people are failing. They don't have the faith to do it. But we need to lend money. Money is oxygen. We need to lend money. So he did something. He said, you know what? I'm going to find a legal way to justify what's already happening. Since the people can't handle it, I'm going to find a way that instead of them transgressing what God said, they'll be fulfilling it. It's true. I'm finding a workaround, but better what? If Klaishel can't handle it, let me find a way that they can do what they're doing correctly. You'll be shocked by this, but Rabbi Yisrael Salant, who was one of the, really changed our modern world. He really did. He changed our modern world. And, in Europe, today, not like today, it's getting worse again, but there was such anti-Semitism. When Jews travel where Jews travel. And even non-religious Jews stayed in the same kosher inn where the religious Jews stayed. Everybody said the Jews weren't wanted any place. So the non-from Jews, they went to the same motel, to the same inn, and went to the same restaurant as the religious Jews, when they were traveling because they couldn't get any place else. And Yisrael Salanter was once in an inn, and he saw a non-religious Jew doing his business, doing his accounts on Shabbos. He's sitting with his books, yes, and doing his accounts. But Israel Salant went to him and he said, "Listen," he says, "please," he says, "if I'll show you how to do your accounts, only transgressing rabbinic laws, would you listen to me?" The guy said yes, and he taught him how to do. Yeah, yeah, it's shocking. He taught him how to do his business on Shabbos and only to transgress rabbinic laws. And when he went to Germany, it was shocking. He taught a whole city. I think it was Mamle. He taught a whole city how to continue violating the Shabbos, but only to violate rabbinic laws. And you know what happened? Eventually, you know what happened? They all kept the Shabbos properly, including the rabbinic laws and the Deraisa law. So you have to know when your intention, it's one thing to censure people, but if your intention is to make them religious, you got to know what you're doing. So Hillel saw this terrible thing. People were failing in a primary obligation, and he said, failing in a primary obligation, we have to do something. So he found a legal way for them to not transgress. So what did they do? He said, listen, you'll lend money, and you know that any debt that's already collected, the Shemitah does not cancel. So what you'll do is we'll write a paper, and you will hand your debts over to the Beis Din. You'll say that the Beis Din is now on your behalf collecting. Okay, and when the Beis Din collects, it's not a problem because the prohibition is for the creditor to collect his debt. For the Beis Din, there's no problem, and the Beis Din will automatically, you'll sign it over, and it'll be like the debt was already collected. And what do? But the rule was that he made it only for people who had land. Okay, no, if the debt went on the land and it would cover all the debts, so it would only work for credit, it would only work for places where the person had land. If the debtor had a piece of land, so the prose bowl that Hillel wrote for the Jewish people would work, but it didn't work if they didn't have land. You'll see today. Most of the I don't paper. The Shemitah, we say if I'm handling and if dead, I'll give him something and make it work. Anyway,
The case of
yeah,
the
yeah,
before
yeah.
that the man was married to
Go ahead, yeah, yeah.
Wouldn't the problem with salvage should become the iris?
Sometimes that happens. But not everybody wants to do that. I know lots of cases here. I know cases where people love each other, and one of them who discovers the truth of the Torah, the other says, "Listen, it's very nice, but I'm not interested. I'm not interested." It happens. I've seen. You stay in the business for a while, you see everything. I've seen they do, they don't, they hate it, they love it. I've seen everything. But it doesn't always go that way. That doesn't always happen. Okay, so Hillel made this beautiful thing called a prose ball. So now the question is, if the prose ball only works when a person has land, so the question is going to come up, well, what about a slave? So take a look. So he says, so Rav Nachman said, listen, I know that I'm right, that our tradition doesn't recognize slaves as real estate. He says, why? Because we learned in the Raisa, the Tani Abimi taught us a Raisa, prose ball, that this special paper of prose ball, where we hand over our debts to the Beis Din, chal ala karka, it works if the borrower has land. Okay, that works. Okay, but it doesn't work if the debtor only has slaves. So you see clearly that the slave does not accept Shaphat, the king, he was a king. The Shaphat in his life, and he gave one of them to be the king. And the father gave to the Matanas Rabbos many gifts, the Chesed, Zav, Midanos, silver and gold and precious things. And listen to this, Im Ori Mitzuros, together with fortified cities of Yehuda in Judah. Now the apostle continues, he gave the kingdom to its firstborn. But look at the things, he gave him these things, and instead of saying he gave him these things and fortified cities, it said he gave him these things with fortified cities. So the translation seems to be what? That he gave them these movable objects by dint of giving them land. This is a source from which the rabbis learn that a person can transfer the ownership of movables by transferring the ownership of land. I tell you, listen, I want to sell you a piece of land, and I want to sell you, a bunch of stuff I have in the Peking. In a sense, so as you acquire the land, I want you also to acquire all these movables that have in Peking. The halacha is when a person does a proper acquisition of the land, they indeed acquire the movables. That's called kinyan agav, that we acquire something by dint of or upon acquisition of land. So a further thing that the Brisa tells us, it says what? He says, metaltalin niknin imakarka. Indeed, you can acquire movables by acquisition of land, okay? But you can't acquire movables by acquisition of a slave. Well, he sees clearly, he's got a Brisa that clearly tells him that slaves are not land. Now, we're going to see later that we can answer all these things, but let's take a look. The Gemara says, you know what? Lema katanoi. Let's say that really this is a Tanoic argument, which is really a kasha on everybody later. And I told you why. Because the halacha is, no one has we don't, later rabbis, the Amoraim, we do not go against the Tanoim. We can paskin like one Tana or another, but personally we don't go up against them. And therefore, whenever we see that later rabbis argue something that was argued by the Tanoim, we raise a difficulty to them. And we say, listen, if you want to rule like one of the Tanoim, that's fine. But you want to personally go up against somebody? Who are you? Who are you to go up against them? What are you doing? So the answer is, he says, maybe this is really a Tanoic argument, and no later rabbi has the right to simply disagree. He can paskin like one Tana, that he can do, like somebody else, but not on his own. So he says, what? He says, let's say this is really a Tanoic argument. Nobody had a right to argue. Because didn't we learn, in one Brisa, we learned the following. If somebody sells to his friend slaves and land, okay, so we learn if the person took possession of the slaves, lo kana karkos, he does not acquire the land. Furthermore, karkos, if he acquired the land, lo kana he doesn't acquire the slaves. Karkos metaltalin. Let's say a person wants to sell what? Land and movables. That's our kinyan agav, our famous one. Like we learned before. If he acquires the land, he takes possession, he acquires also the movables. The metaltalin kanakaka, he acquires the movables. That is not enough. You can't acquire land with movables. Avodim and metaltalin. What about now? You want to transfer ownership of slaves and movables. If the person took possession of the slaves, he does not take possession of the movables. If he takes possession of the movables, it doesn't acquire the slaves. That sounds clear that you see that slaves do not have that rule of what? Of land. That's one brisa. However, but we learned in another brisa, in the case, okay, if in the case we want to acquire slaves and movables, if he took possession of the slaves, he does acquire the movables. So isn't that exactly the argument? What? The Mar Sabar, that the second brisa that says that you acquire the movables with slaves, believes avadim become a karkai dummy. He agrees with what? With Ula, Rabbi Lazar, etc. That slaves are like land. Umar Sabar, and one brisa holds avadim become a talpin dummy. He holds what? The first brisa holds what? That slaves are like movables, and therefore slaves cannot acquire the movables. So how do our later rabbis have a right to disagree? Amar Rab Ika they could have paskin. Please don't. It's very important to tell you. They could paskin. You have a right. You have a right to. The halacha follows the basra. You have a right to paskin like one tana against another, but not yourself. You say not to go up yourself. So who are you? What are you doing? Amravika Breda Rabami, he says no. The Kuliyama Abadimika Makarkai. He says no. Do not. I can remove this difficulty on the later rabbis. I can read it one that both prices hold what? Hold that slaves are really like land, like Ula said, and like Rabbi Lazar said, etc. 1 second. So when what am I going to do with the second brisa that said that slit when it says that that you acquire the chattels when it says, pardon me, and so then when the brisa said what the second brisa kana that you acquire the chattels with the land shopper, that's fine. I have a hard time, but what I do with the first brisa that said lo kana that you don't acquire the movables with the land, that's a kasha. The answer is, but inyan kaka dumya the arim mitzuras biyudi. Here's why. Really, the truth is that slaves are like land. But in this particular acquisition of acquiring chattels together with land, since it's learned from a particular pasuk, really slaves are land. But in this case, since when we learned the ability of land to acquire chattels, it was learned from the pasuk that said what? What was the land? The land was what? The chattels were acquired with cities, with fortified cities in Yehuda. We need something karka dumya. The land has to be just like the source. The Arim Mitzvah Yehuda has to be like fortified cities in Judah. The lo naidi that don't move. They're not moving. They don't have a mind of their own. Get out and move around all over the place. Okay, and so therefore, what? That's what the Torah told us. So the Torah told us you can only do it with real estate. Okay, now. Even the slaves, for every other reason, will be like land, but not for this particular acquisition. It's not, because where was the source of the kinyan of acquiring chattels with land? Because we learned the chasim she'enan achrayus, the things that don't have guarantee. In other words, chattel movables, non-land, niknim chasim achrayus, non-real estate is acquired with real estate. B'kesef, b'shtar, u'b'chazaka. Whenever I do one of the three ways of acquiring land, by money, by a contract, or by fixing the borders, okay, any one of those ways, I acquire automatically the chattel. Immediately, where did I learn it from? From the pasuk that we said. Amar Chizkiya, he said, I learned it. The Amar Kra, because the pasuk said in Divrei Yomim that Yehoshaphat, Vayitein lehem abiyim matanos rabos. The father gave to the sons many gifts: the kesel, the zav, the migdanos, the gold, the silver, the gold, and precious things. And he gave it him not and fortified cities, but by dint of. Through the acquisition of Arim Mitzvah Yehuda of these fortified cities. Now, so good. So now we answered. That's one way we answered. Don't worry, everything is good, and we can read both prices like whom, but like Ula and like Rabbi Lazar. Some people say no. He answered the other way. I could also answer what he answered in favor of Rav Nachman. The Kuli Alma Abdika Metaltli Dame. I could say both prices really believe that slaves are really chattels. The Haditanya Lokana and the Brisa that said that you don't acquire the first Brisa Shapir. That makes sense because they don't acquire because slaves are not land. The Haditanya, the second Brisa that said Kana, that you acquire chattels by way of slaves, but Odin Olav. You're making a mistake. It's not acquiring them through the rule of Agav, of what? Of acquiring chattels with real estate. It's acquiring them because they're on him, and it's acquiring by a different rule entirely called Chatzer. We learned by two places, but for our purpose, we learned recently by Gittin, we learned that one of the ways that a person can acquire is using his house, his courtyard, his field, or even his utensils. You put something in to something that belongs to him, that's his domain. It's also a way of acquiring. So the slave here is his domain, and the chattels are literally on the slave. So when you acquire the slave, you're acquiring it, but not by dint of real estate. The slave being real estate. No, the slave is a courtyard. Azumar says, one second. So he said that it's only incidental. Really, a slave is not land. And you made a mistake. You thought that the reason the Brisa said he's acquiring because he's land. No, he's acquiring because he's a courtyard. He's not land. He's a courtyard. Like your possessions, like my pot. Like you put something in my pot, I can also acquire it.
It's not courtyard real estate?
No, so I tried to say like a pot. I said for example, no, not correct. I said what I said to you is like a pot. You don't. The kotzer is not only a courtyard. It's some real estate can be a courtyard, but a pot's a pot. My pots, my pans, my oven. These are also a kotzer. My possessions can acquire. Love my hobby. Okay, well, you said 1 second. So what if they're on the slave? That's not going to work. Okay, why? Because we have a rule. You want to answer me by saying we're talking about acquisition through a courtyard? We got a rule. Chatzam alechasi, a slave is a moving courtyard, and we have a rule. Chatzam alechas lokana. That what we have a rule that a moving courtyard does not acquire. Why is that? You say 1 second. Okay, so let's say he's still going to acquire so you can't tell me that it's a courtyard because it's a courtyard that doesn't work. No, don't worry. Maybe you'll answer me. Maybe you want to answer me. No. Okay, so the slave is standing. He's not moving. It doesn't matter because we have a rule that the rule of a moving courtyard being disqualified is not dependent on the current state. It's dependent on one's ability. My Rabba didn't tell me, isn't it true that anything that if it will move, it doesn't acquire? It also doesn't acquire when it's still. It's the ability to move that makes it non-reliable, not the fact that it is moving. So if I don't care if the slave is not moving, he's still called a moving courtyard. The answer is what? But halachas, don't worry. It's still a good answer. Why? Bekafus. Why? Because we can still answer. Because even if I would tie up a slave, he no longer has the ability to move, and therefore, in such a case, he's called a non-moving courtyard. A tied-up slave is not a moving courtyard, and therefore we've answered according to Rabbi Lazar and Ula, and we've answered according to Rav Nachman. Now says the Gemara. 1 second, slow down. Mechlal. It says the way that we learned when we said that. 1 second, let me just make a bracha. Bracha to Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekol mi. So 1 second, he says, according to what you're saying, the upshot is what? The high lokana. I'm sorry, I had to go further. I skipped that 1 second. So the Gemara says like this. We learned before that in the Brisa that if he takes possession of the land, he doesn't take possession of slaves. Okay? I have a hard time yet, but we learned the other way. We learned that what? That he takes possession of land, he does take possession of the slaves. What's going on? The answer is don't worry. Hasam, when we said that when he takes possession of the land, takes possession of the slaves, you have to say what? Ba'omdim b'socha. That's why they are acquired when they're with the land. Even though they shouldn't be acquired, they're acquired. I said, 1 second, what are you talking about? Mechlal, the high lokana. You tell me what? When it said that when you said that he didn't acquire the slaves, it's when they're not in it. What are you talking about? That doesn't make any sense. What you're talking about? Why? That's good according to the possibility we said before. What that avdei kamataltali dami. That you said what that slaves that are like chattels. And you're going to say what? That if slaves are like chattels, the in. So only if they're within where they're on the land, it works. Okay, the low, and if not. El haq lishna. The Amar Avdei Kamakar. But if you hold slaves are like land, although I can understand, okay, you want to when you want to hold what that they're chattels, so you're going to acquire them the way you acquire chattels. It has to be inside. He says, but if you say that it's land, okay, why do I need the slave to be standing in it? Didn't we learn that when I acquire one piece of land, I can acquire many pieces of land? You don't have to have the land in the land to acquire land. Why? Amar Shmuel. Didn't Shmuel say, let's say I want to sell somebody 10 fields in 10 different countries. The second the guy acquired one of those fields, Kanakuli acquires all of them. So if a slave is really land, I don't need the slave to be in the land in order for him to acquire it. The land works together. He says, look, get out of here. He says, you're not making any sense anyway. Look, I should have said this before, but take a look. He says, he says, and the way he says, why are you only asking on if we think it's land? Even if I thought the slaves was chattels, he still wouldn't have to be on the land. He says, what are you talking about? When we said that slaves are like chattels, also there, I don't need the Eved to be standing in it. It's not true. When I acquire by a courtyard, I don't need the chattels to be in the courtyard. It's an established rule. I have an established rule. I don't need, if I want to acquire chattels by dint of land, the chattels can be in China. They can be anywhere. As long as I acquire the land, I acquire the chattels. So you're not making any sense. You're not making any sense. You want to tell me? You want to tell me? You want to tell me because you want to tell me there's a difference between. It's only a question to you by acquiring by agav. You have a question. You have acquire also by acquiring by chatzir. What's the difference? But what are you going to answer when we thought that he was chattels and you're acquiring by chatzir? What did you answer? Shani metaltali the naidi. Okay, even by a kinyan of a chatzir. There's a difference between chattels that can walk around and chattels that can't walk around. And when you acquire by land, the chattels that can't walk around can be anywhere, and they're acquired and they can be acquired by aga, pardon me. They can be acquired by dint of the land. Achinami too. So we can say the same thing here. Okay, even if you hold that slaves are like land, even by acquiring, so you think, oh, so I acquire any piece of land, I acquire every piece of land. So if I acquire this land, why can't I acquire the slave who's also land? I can still make a difference. Shani Makarka Denaidi, there's a difference between land that can move, the same difference. If I look at a slave as chattels, there's a difference between chattels that move and chattels that don't. If I look at a slave like land, I can still say that there's difference between land that moves and land that doesn't. Abda Makarkai Denaidi. Even according to this opinion, a slave is a type of land that moves. Okay, and we have a rule that the reason why I can buy 10 pieces of land by taking possession of one, Hasa, because there I say, Sadna de Ara Chadu. Sadna is a funny word. Sadna is actually like an anvil. But the point is like this: it means that the spread of the land is one. All lands are connected. Every piece of land is connected to every other piece of land. So really, since land doesn't move, if I acquire one piece of land, it's automatically connected to every other piece of land is connected to the piece of land I'm acquiring. So I can acquire other land. But a slave, even though he's land, but he's land that's unique, just like you said, if you thought the slave is chattels, he's different than chattels that don't move. Also, if you look at a slave as land, he's different than land different than land that doesn't move, and therefore only by a slave, all of a sudden you need the land in the land in order to acquire one piece of land with another. Now you're going to be surprised that okay, no, we can go for it now. We furthermore like this. Now we're done with this piece. We've had this particular argument about the slaves, etc. We learned at the end of the Mishnah, the Chasim Shein Ben Me'ila. We said a funny word, and we cheated in a certain respect. When we read the Mishnah, we said, "Oh, damages only when your property when your ox gores another ox, it's only liable for goring an ox that belongs to a common householder, but it's not liable if it gores an ox that belongs to the temple." But that's not what the Mishnah said. It said it only applies to things to which the rules of misappropriation apply. Why do we use that word? Why didn't it say it only applies to non-holy things and it doesn't apply to temple property? Why did you use a roundabout way of describing temple property, holy property, by saying that it only applies to things that don't have the rule of misappropriation, i.e. things that are not temple? Why don't you just say things that are not temple? So from the fact that you used a roundabout language and you said that it only applies to things that don't have misappropriation, so they're going to say what? Me'ila, who the lesbo. So you know what? It's only, when is it that if it applies, it applies so long as it doesn't have misappropriation. Ha mikachi kachi. But even if it's holy, it does apply. It's not true that damages don't apply to everything holy. It only applies to holy things. It only applies. It's not true that it doesn't apply to anything holy. It's only true it doesn't apply to things that are holy if the rule of misappropriation applies. But if the rule of misappropriation doesn't apply, then damages are even applicable to what? The things that are holy. Whoa. Okay, interesting. So the Mishnah is really letting us know that it's following a particular opinion. The Gemara says, Mantana, who is the opinion that holds that damages apply to something that's holy? Okay, if they don't have the rule of misappropriation. Rav Yochanan says, I'll tell you who it is. There's a special opinion that holds that things where misappropriation doesn't apply, even though they're holy, they actually belong to the individual. Okay, why is that? Because he said, Rabbi Yochanan said, "What? You know what? We're talking about kachim kalim. We're talking about sacrifices that are of the lesser. We're talking about sacrifices that are of the lesser quality. What does that mean? We divide sacrifices into kachim kalim and heavy ones. What is the difference between light ones and the heavy ones? In the light ones, the owners can eat from their sacrifice. In the more severe ones, only if something like that, maybe the kohanim can get, but the owner cannot. So now we're going to see that kachim kalim, he's going to have an opinion that these kachim kalim, okay, really are in the possession of. We don't say that they belong to the temple. They really belong, at least until their sacrifices. We'll see, they really belong, even though they've been dedicated and designated sacrifices, they really continue to belong to their owners. Okay, why? Because he says what? And Aliba de Rabbi Yossi Aglida, he holds the Mama Balani. He holds that light sacrifices are really belong to the they really belong to the person who's giving them until they're sacrificed. Now, where do we get it from? Okay, the time, because we learned the following. You know that when a person is a watchman, and he swore that he didn't have something, he lied, and he said he doesn't have it. His friend says, "You have my money," whatever he says, "You have my money." He lied. So afterwards, he admits that he lied. He took an oath falsely. The halacha is that he has to give back the principle that he lied about, plus a fifth, and bring a sacrifice. Okay, and it's interesting that the pasuk that's speaking about really a monetary deal uses the word for holy sacrifices. Look what the pasuk says. I'm quoting the pasuk Vayikra Hey Chav Aleph. Okay, it says Nefesh ki sechto, when a person will sin, umalamol ba'Hashem, and look, he did a misappropriation. He did wrong to God, even though it's talking about a case between two humans. Okay, but he lied to his friend, whether it was with a deposit of a sumis yad or with an investment of a gezel, etc. And he did these things to his friend. See, and nevertheless, it speaks about what? Misappropriating to God. So it must be, this is really strange. It must be some place where the guy can do wrong to God, and yet yes between the two people. What is that case? Somehow holy things are somehow mixed into a regular case. The answer is the Rabbos Kachim Kalin. It's telling me what? Even by light sacrifices, it must be that we learn the pasuk. He has a chiddush, and we learn the pasuk this way, like Rav Yosef Glili, that if a person gave a deposit to his friend of a sacrifice, of a light sacrifice, and then the depositee lied, okay, and he swore falsely that he didn't have it. Afterwards, he has to give back the principal, plus a fifth, and bring a sacrifice on Hashem. Why? Shehem Mamono, because even though they were light sacrifices, they remain the personal property of the person who's supposed to bring the sacrifices. Okay, and until they're sacrificed, they remain his, and that's why when the guy denies it, he has all the penalties of one man to another. Okay, Divrei Yosef Glili. Okay, that was the opinion of Yosef Glili, and we're learning that just like that's the rule when it comes to lying, when one person lied to the other, so too is that going to be the rule when one person damages another. And Kachim Kali are indeed subject to the laws of damages. 1 second, the Gemara says, wait a second. Well, Tanan, how can you say such a thing? How can you say that Kachim Kalim really belong to the owners? Didn't we learn? Amakadesh bechelko. Let's say a person, we made a sacrifice, and here's your part, here's your lunch, here's your holy lunch. We give each person a person gets his portion of the sacrifice. And what happened was, the guy took his portion of the sacrifice. He said he wants to get married that day. So instead of eating, he takes the portion of the sacrifice and he uses it to marry a woman. Okay, he wants to marry the woman with it. So now the halacha says we learn bein b'kachei kadashim, whether they're severe sacrifices like it's a kohen, bein b'kadashim kalim, whether they're non-severe sacrifices in anybody, ain't a mekudeshes. It doesn't work. Okay, you're not able to marry the woman. Okay, lema delok of Yosef Glili. Should I say that Mishnah is against Rav Yosef Glili? Because that Mishnah clearly holds that even Kachim Kalim are not your possessions. You can't marry a woman with them. Now, why is it bothering us? Okay, so no, it's not Rav Yosef Glili. So what? The answer is because remember, you've seen before that in general, if a Mishnah is unsigned, we assume that remember a Stam Mishnah, that's halacha, that's the way it's supposed to be. So if our Mishnah was Stam, was unconditionally taught, and we said it to Yosef Glili, then this Mishnah also that says that you can't marry the woman with your portion should also be unconditional, the same thing. They shouldn't contradict each other. The two Stam Mishnahs shouldn't be one against and one for Yosef Glili. It doesn't make any sense. So Gemara says, don't worry, we can solve it. What we said is still correct. Even though that Mishnah said you cannot use your Kachim Kalim to marry a woman, and our Mishnah says that the Kachim Kalim are indeed your possession, it's not a contradiction. I can tell you that even the Mishnah that said that you can't marry the woman with your Kachim Kalim, and even I can say it follows Rabbi Yosef Glili that it's your possession. Why? Ki amar Rabbi Yosef Glili. When Rabbi Yosef Glili say that the kachim kalim are your possession, like I mentioned to you before, mechayim, up until they're sacrificed, so long as they're still alive. But when you take your portion, you get your portion of the sacrifice after it's dead, after it's been shechted, after it's been shchita. But once it's been shechted, afilu Rabbi Yosef Glili moda. Even Rabbi Yosef Glili agrees that what? Even though that up until the sacrifice itself, it was in the possession of the donor, of the guy giving it. Okay, but after it's been sacrificed, when he gets his portion, he's like a person coming to eat. He has permission to eat it, but it's not his. It's his. God gave it to him. He's eating from God's table. He invited him to lunch. Again, gives him. It's his right to eat it, but it's not his right to use it for other things. So now we can answer nicely. Now we can answer nicely. So everything so far we've answered good. Our Mishnah really teaches us what? Our Mishnah used a roundabout language because it's not true that all sacrifices are subject to the laws of Nezikin. The truth is that if my ox scores an animal of kachim kalim, of light sacrifices, I have to pay. Why? Because since the rules of misappropriation do apply there because it's really the property. Pardon me. Since the rules of misappropriation don't apply because it's really the property of the person who's giving it, so it works. And with that, we've solved everything. Now, even though it looks like I'm stopping I'm stopping early because the next question is every word for the rest of the page and onwards is a single difficulty, and I think it'll be especially in light of the time and the day, etc., and everything else. And we best start tomorrow, and we'll mop it up very quickly, Mitzvah Hashem. Thank you so much. A good chodesh and a wonderful day.
9. What time is that? 9:30.
12 o'clock, yeah.
I have to pay him.
Plural of chattel. Is chattel.
Thanks.
Okay, it's not chattels. You did say you live there.
In the wheel.
Yeah.
You park it over here. Yeah, but you know, after work.
I didn't know I could do that. What do you have people lift you up? Not here to the other one is study on the feet. Yeah. I guess I better find another place. This way. No, I just want to do it. I took over my sister. It's good there's a rug in this room.
Wheels in the way, right? Park it over there. People are walking.
On the other side.
Other stuff.
All right. I'll put it on the other side.